Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the President's Podcast with Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, right here on our online newsroom, On the Record with the Ohio Senate. The news, the views excludes on to episode 2. Great to have you back.
Nice to be here, John.
You enjoying doing this?
Yeah, this is an interesting experience. I've been on the radio a lot, and then you get interviewed on TV, but sitting and more than 30 seconds is used it's a different experience.
And make sure that if you're enjoying our podcast, you can subscribe to On the Record, upper left-hand corner. Just click on the button, and you can always find the President's Podcast, upper right-hand corner, and it takes you right to Spotify, and you can listen to it. How about redistricting? You want to talk redistricting?
I can't wait to talk redistricting.
I bet you can't wait.
Yes.
Hey, let me start, however. We had a 7-0 vote by the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and I want to read a statement from Senator Rob McCauley, who was our member on the commission. He's a Republican from Napoleon. He said in his release, "Tonight we proved that good faith negotiations with our colleagues from both sides of the aisle, guided by the process approved by the voters to draw legislative districts, can work exactly the way it was intended to work when not undermined by out-of-state special interest groups."
Yeah, well, Senator McCauley's a very smart guy and did, frankly, I thought, a remarkable job guiding the process. And I would say from the Senate perspective, but I think he was also pretty instrumental with the other members. And of course, we have Ray DeRossi, who's been doing these maps in a variety of ways for about 30 years. So when you have that sort of process in-house here in the Senate, it helps. And it helps to inform the other members and help them make decisions. So, but he's absolutely right. When we passed this in 2015, this is the process we had in mind.
What changed from 2021 and 2022 with all the vileness, the rancor? What was the difference from going from that to passing unanimous maps by the commission?
Well, I think actually it's helpful to go back before that to when we passed this. So I was part of the map drawing process as a member of the House. I was a majority leader in 2011, so I worked on the congressional map and the General Assembly maps both. And it was at that point that, I went to Speaker Batchelder and I said, there's probably better ways to do this. And I worked with the Constitutional Modernization Commission. And I introduced resolutions to change how both these processes would happen in 2014. And so we did it for the General Assembly. And for those who may remember, late on the last day of the Senate's meeting in 2014, we worked out a deal, and it was between the 4 caucuses, and Minority Leader Budish at the time, and I on behalf of the Republicans in the House, and then Senator Faber, who was the president of the Senate, and Senator Schiavone, who represented the Democrats in the Senate. And we were up very late on a particular evening in 2014, and we came together and drafted this process, all 4 caucuses. And then we put it on the ballot. And I was out of the legislature in 15 and 16, as was now Senator Vernon Sykes. And Senator Sykes and I were the co-chairs of the campaign in 2015 to pass this process. And it was lauded throughout the state as the way that we should do this. Both political parties drafted it, or endorsed it rather. Most of the editorial pages thought this was a great idea, and it passed with over 70% of the vote, which is pretty difficult to do with anything that's on the ballot, because most folks like to vote no when they don't know what it is. So we did that in 2015. In 2021, there were 2 problems. One, there was a pandemic, and we couldn't get the information from the federal government we needed.
Census information.
The census. Yeah, exactly. The census data, which typically would be available the 1st of July. Well, it wasn't available till the beginning of September, and we had a constitutional deadline of September 15th. And so we had a very short period of time to even negotiate with the other side. And as a result of that, a map was drawn. The 2 Democrats voted no. And the most perplexing part of what happened 2 years ago was the period of time between September 21 and the middle of January 22 when nothing happened. The case was taken to the Ohio Supreme Court and no decision was made until 10 days before the filing deadline. And that's when the chaos starts. Now, part of the reform in 2015 was that the Supreme Court, this was new in our Constitution, was not allowed to draw any district or map in this redistricting process for the General Assembly. They're prohibited by the Constitution from doing that. Well, the Supreme Court sends back a decision that says this is all wrong and you must do all of these things.
That don't appear in the Constitution.
That don't appear in the Constitution, that look like they're trying to draw a map, except they're ordering us to draw the map. And that quickly broke down for a couple of reasons. One is the Supreme Court can't do that. And secondly, the Supreme Court can't do that. And there's not going to be 4 votes on this commission to do what you want anyway. You can say, you have to do it this way, you have to do it this way. And at some point, the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice order us to do that. Well, as I was on another podcast, not as more famous than this one, I should say, and tried to explain it. Well, for now, right? For now. And people said, well, can't a court order anybody to do anything? Well, the Supreme Court of the state of Ohio or any other state can't order its legislature to pass a law. That would be like if the legislature passed a bill that said, Supreme Court, you shall issue this opinion. It doesn't work that way. We have the separation of powers, of course. So ultimately, the process that was created in a bipartisan fashion in 2014, approved overwhelmingly by both parties, was corrupted by this series of invasive Supreme Court decisions that weren't part of the decision, which ultimately the process failed, and we didn't have a map, and the federal court had to impose a map.
How big of a influence do you think the special interest groups had in the original process? Because what was really interesting, when the 2 Democrats, Senator Antonio and Representative Russo, voted in favor, along with the Republicans on the commission this time around, as soon as that happened, the same special interest groups that railed against Republicans and rallied a lot of activists at these meetings immediately rolled the Democrats under the bus. The All on the Line Ohio former director, which is the arm of the NDRC, which is the National Democratic Redistricting Commission that Eric Holder runs, blasted the Democrats and said there was no defensible reason why the Democrats voted for clearly, legally gerrymandered maps. You're either on the side of building a people-powered democracy or you're not. And all 7 commissioners made clear they don't care about people power. Interesting what happens when the NDRC, fair districts, and the League of Women Voters, I like to call them all to undermine Ohio, unfair districts, and the League of Liberal Misinformation. When they don't get what they want, they blast everybody.
Well, right. I mean, I think anybody who takes a serious look at this and who did in 2021 understands that this is a national group which is working state to state, and it's not about fair districts, it's not about anti-gerrymandering, this is about electing more Democrats to the office. So Eric Holder, for example, is not filing lawsuits in the state of Maryland. State of Maryland, which is roughly 60-40 in favor of Democrats. Larry Hogan was their Republican governor who just left office recently. 7 out of 8 of their congressmen are Democrats, or 87.5%, if I get it right. And, you know, but he's not interested in that. He's not interested in going to Massachusetts, which is also roughly a 60-40 Democrat state, or maybe 2/3. 9 out of 9 of their congressmen are Democrats. So it's not about anti-gerrymandering or fair districts. This is about political power in Washington. And that's why they have an interest in the General Assembly, because of the constitutional guarantee in the U.S. Constitution that state legislatures draw these districts. And that's really what next year's ballot initiative about. It's about taking the General Assembly out of it so that more Democrats will get elected. That's what it's about.
And the person that is really running that ballot initiative is the former Chief Justice. And here's the statement from that campaign. And this is her quote. She said regarding the 7-0 bipartisan vote for the new maps for the Ohio General Assembly, she said, Maureen O'Connor, this is a bipartisan gerrymander by politicians who decided to protect themselves and their friends, ignoring the people of Ohio. It could not be more clear that we need citizens, not politicians, drawing legislative maps that put the people first. Democrats and Republicans both can't be trusted to draw fair maps in an open and transparent process. How can anybody have confidence in what 7 politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, on the Redistricting Commission have done?
Well, so here's the problem. You will hear on an almost constant basis, if you go out and take a poll, people will say, we just want these people to work together. Now, some Republicans may not say that, and some Democrats may say it, but most of the public is, can't they get together? Can't they compromise? Can't they, and on some things we can't, because one side feels this way and one side feels the other. Most of the time we do. Most of our bills pass out of here, and they are bipartisan. This is the most difficult thing to get bipartisan agreement on, the drawing of districts. And when we sat down to do this process in 2014, and the voters approved it in 2015, in this was a series of penalties and incentives for both sides. If you do this, you're going to get penalized. If you do that, you won't. And both sides had this in mind. And that's what happened here. So the people who are put in charge of making the decision, Senator Antonio and Representative Russo and all the other, Senator McCauley and everybody else who's on here, those folks are the ones that have to make the decision. Those are the folks who have to come together. The court, the Ohio Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice have no business participating in this situation. Now, if Maureen O'Connor is a private citizen, she can say whatever she wants, but the Supreme Court had no business making all those orders. So the question really is, what does the public want? Do they want bipartisan compromise to get things done on occasion? Sometimes we can't do that. Or do they want politicians in the form of Maureen O'Connor and Eric Holder and well-funded folks in Washington deciding who's representing you in Columbus?
Because who really would appoint a citizen commission anyway? Political partisans. Partisans would be appointing people to so-called independent commission.
Sure. Yeah, all of the folks who would serve, who would appoint the people, as I understand it, the folks who would appoint the people, those are politicians, as we call, they're elected officials. They're going to be appointed people to former elected officials who are also members of political parties. And then it kind of goes on to there and gets a little confusing. But the point is that ultimately, elections have consequences, and the folks who get elected and therefore are responsible to the people, those are the ones we hold accountable.
Candidates, campaigns, and issues matter. Would you agree with that? When it comes to winning races, right now, of the 15 Democrat index districts that lean Democrat in the state, 8 of those districts are held by Republicans.
Right.
Isn't the difference the candidate, the issues they campaign on, and also just the campaigns as well? I mean, the issues that they campaign on and the way they run their campaign, that's really a big part of getting elected.
Yeah, so I mean, you take, and that's really sort of the real shame, I think, when people simply want to draw things based on partisan index, which was the whole movement 10 years ago, was to get away from that, right? Keep communities together. It shouldn't be about partisan index and all of that. And so we have more competitive districts. But what do you do when you're a Democrat and you have to run against a Manning in Lorain County? You're probably going to lose. Now, if the district was 60-40, maybe you could beat Nathan Manning or Gail Manning, but not in a 50-50 district. Because why? Because people like the Mannings in Lorain County. They do a great job. They represent them. And remember, it's not just Republicans and Democrats. There's more independents than Republicans and Democrats. And a lot of Democrats are going to vote for a Republican named Manning in Lorain County. That's one small example. If you want to win, do the things you have to win, which starts with getting good candidates.
Are these 8-year maps? Are these maps for the rest of the decade? What's your opinion on that, with a unanimous vote?
I think the spirit of the Constitution says, yes, they are 8-year maps. This wasn't anticipated. The incentive, which was, hey, let's make a deal for a 10-year map while everybody doesn't know what's going to happen over the next 4 years, that's the incentive that's built in. And the idea was if there was unanimous, it would be for a 10-year period. Now, the Constitution doesn't speak to this situation, but I think the spirit of it is that it should be 8 years.
Opponents love to use the word gerrymandering and throw it at everything that they possibly can. Just because you maybe don't like a district or you don't like where a line fell, doesn't mean it's gerrymandering. It might be geography. It might just be the way the lines were drawn. By default, Article 11 within the Constitution says you can't gerrymander. Would you agree with that?
Well, so there's two parts. There's a lot of parts to Article 11, but basically Article 11 says here are a number of very restrictive rules on the numbers of local jurisdictions you can divide up, population, a whole number of other things. And if you follow those rules, the map is constitutional, but if you don't follow the rules, then you have to go to Section 6 of Article 11. Now, what is Section 6? Section 6 is the gerrymander section. Section 6 says you can do whatever you want as long as so many Democrats win and so many Republicans win. And that is, in fact, what all of these folks are hanging their hat on. We don't care about the rules. We care about a number of Democrats and a number of Republicans winning. That's the definition of gerrymandering. So when Eric Holder says this, when Maureen O'Connor says this, that the other side is gerrymandering, they're actually trying to accomplish exactly that.
They call that representational fairness, which is a fancy way of saying gerrymandering.
Well, I think it's a fancy way of saying nothing. It's two nice words that put together mean nothing, but if you say it, well, then somehow you must be a better person.
Fixed outcomes through the courts.
Yes. So in fact, trying to draw districts to achieve a political outcome in a certain ratio, that's what Elbridge Gerry was trying to do in Massachusetts all those years ago.
So in Ohio, under Article 11, you can look it up, and if you don't do 2, 3, 5, and 7, or you violate any of those sections, it goes to 6.
Which is the gerrymander portion of the Constitution.
Now, here's what's going to happen.
Right.
We're talking with Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman here on the President's Podcast on the Record. Also, interesting court case happening right now regarding something that you have been working toward. Senator Reineke was working very hard on getting Senate Bill 1 passed, which was reforming and bringing accountability to the Ohio Department of Education and reforming the duties of the state school board. Right now in Franklin County, there is a court case being heard about a temporary restraining order trying to block that from happening as it was included in the state budget. Your overall thoughts on that?
Well, just as an aside, we've had this issue, similar issue in the federal government, where there'll be an executive order issued by the White House from either party, or Congress will pass a bill, or there'll be an appropriate rule come out of an agency. And one federal district judge somewhere in the United States, sometimes in Hawaii or in the 9th District in California, will issue a judge and put a restraining order and essentially set aside all of the decision-making processes that are in our Constitution, either through Congress or the authority given to the president or authority given by Congress to agencies, which is probably too much anyway, but one person shuts that all down. And that's essentially the same concept that we have here with the judge who issued it. Now, we'll find out whether that order, in fact, was extrajudicial. In other words, whether she had the authority to do that, and that will be coming down the pike here. But the fact that this is happening is, I want to look at my Democrat friends and say, do you really think you can get policy changes through the court? ultimately you have to go win political races. You have to go out and run and win and do things like that. This is going to happen. Now, if they want to cause chaos over the next few months before a court of appeals steps in or the Ohio Supreme steps in, okay, that's going to happen. But this is also why the public turns away from folks and parties who are doing this and says, we're looking for solutions. And, you know, when I worked on this since I first came to the Senate in one form or fashion. Senator Reineke really deserves the credit on this. But this is something that all the governors have wanted since the time of Dick Celeste.
Why was it important? Why was it important to you?
Well, the reason it was important to me was the lack of accountability to the Department of Education. So you have a 15-member board, which is essentially of volunteers that have no staff. And they're supposed to be overseeing this multi-billion-dollar, $12 billion operation. And they show up once a month or so, and maybe they talk about it, maybe they don't. They have a resolution that really is important, but that's not what their job is. And I, by the way, had this conversation with one of the folks at one of our state universities. We've got state boards of trustees running several billion-dollar operations. They're volunteers. They don't have a staff. Do we really know what the presidents and all these administrators are doing all the time? So I think that needs to be changed. But getting back to the point, the state school board was really at a disadvantage as to what they should do. It would be kind of like if the Senate came here and I had no staff, I was doing it for free, and I had to make decisions about billions of dollars and how they were going to be spent. Well, I come here once a month, and all I know is what the executive branch lays down in front of me and says, here's what we're voting on today. Well, of course, that's not representative government. You're not accountable to the people. So that was one problem. The other problem was the Ohio Department of Education really didn't care too much what the legislature thought. And I know that because their legislative liaison told me that. He said, look, we don't work for you. We work for the state school board. And I said, okay, I get that. We're going to change that. And that's what we did. So this is going to happen. It may cause confusion and delay and chaos, and I thought the governor was very strong in his press conference about how this was going to be handled, and so hopefully it gets resolved quickly and we're in better shape.
It also comes down to how lawsuits are paid for with tax dollars from special interest groups.
Right.
That seems to be especially egregious in this case because the only people that are really caught in the middle from the people that are challenging this new law and the realignment of accountability, the only people that are caught in the middle are students and parents and families wondering, are the schools going to stay open or not?
Right, and the teachers and administrators and others principals who are trying to run school operations, they're sitting over there because one of the reasons that this got passed it's not just because Matt Huffman thought it was a good idea. We had local public school superintendents saying, we can't get an answer out of ODE. We can't get the state school board to address the issues that we want. And there's a lot of stories I could tell you about people sitting right here in this room talking to me about it. So it is something that I guess people should be very concerned, and frankly, further demonstrates the state school boards, because as I understand it, these are several state school board members who are filing the lawsuit, their inability to understand what is going on around them. And if we have to change the makeup of the state school board, if we have to change it to an all-elected board or an all-appointed board, then we'll do that, because like the duties of the state school board, the makeup of the state school board is determined by law, and the legislature makes the law along with the governor, and if we have to change that to avoid things like this in the future, we will.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, Republican from Lima, thanks for your time as always. We appreciate it.
Great being here, John.
By the way, next week, a must-watch and must-listen-to podcast, former state senator Bill Seitz from Cincinnati will be joining President Huffman. Of course, Bill Seitz is an in the House right now,
Yeah.
state representative. So that we'll hear a lot of great stories.
Bill's a great friend, so I'm looking forward to that.
Also, speaking of the realignment and accountability of the state school board, make sure you look at our new content on the Record. We have an editorial from State Senator Bill Reinecke, who was the main sponsor of Senate Bill 1, talking about why it was so important to him. Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of On the Record. The views, the news excludes, and the President's podcast, and we'll see you soon.